Hi, welcome to Model Railroading Live. It's September 12th, 2020, and this is a special edition, a new show that we've come together in cooperation with John Farrington and Thomas Klimowski. John Farrington has a Somerset Industrial Complex Railroad, small shelf railroad, and everybody knows Tom's Georgia Northeastern Railroad. Uh, we've partnered with them, or they've actually said we have this really great idea and we want to do it, and we were like, yeah, let's do this. And it's a four-part series, and tonight's the first part, and the name of this series is called A Small Layout with Big Opportunities. And I think this is going to be highly educational. I think it's going to be informative. I think it's going to be, I really do think it's going to be worth watching. So if you guys are out there, you want to tune into this, mark it on your calendar because we're doing it right now. So without, and before I start, I just want to mention one thing. Yesterday was 9/11 throughout the United States, yesterday all day. And as a New Yorker and someone who witnessed it up close and personal, I just want to say this: we will never forget. God bless all those that were there. First responders, firefighters, New York City Police Department, EMT, everybody, everybody. So we will never forget. Anyway, with that said, let me introduce Tom, as I affectionately call him Tommy K. Now listening to the Brooklyn gang of model railroaders, so we're going to call him Tommy K. But Tom, thank you, John. Welcome to doing this. It was a great idea when you presented it to us, and so happy that we're doing it. Let me get my volume down. As I've actually called him Tommy K. Hold on. Okay, there we go. Yes, Tom, I had to turn down the thing. Tom, thank you, and John, thank you so much for being on it. So, Tom, give us a basic. What are we looking forward to on this new series?
Well, we're going to break it down into four parts, but primarily the idea is encouraging people to build a model railroad. A lot of people don't think they have the space. They want to have a 20 by 30, basement layout, and if they can't have that, they're not going to have anything at all. And that's not necessarily true. I mean, we're not here to tell you what you can and what you can't do, but we're here to encourage you to consider maybe some spots that you hadn't considered before, or some different things to make your layout operate larger than what it is. John is a perfect example. He's got a small shelf layout, and he's got a great layout. It's got a lot of operating potential. We'll talk a little bit more about my layout. And when I came up here, I moved to the mountains of Northeast Georgia, and the wife said, "Well, make the train room as big as you want." And but there was some other, uh, stipulations. Well, we got to have this, we got to have that, we got to have that. So the train room kept getting smaller and smaller. But we'll talk a little bit more about that as as the show goes on. So that'll be primarily this first show is going to be an orientation, and talking a little bit about some of the factors to consider when building a layout, and also some room considerations. The second show will be a little bit more about designing your track plan, selecting industries, and construction methods. And then the third show will be operations. So we'll get into operating on the layout, some things that you can do to make your operations more realistic. If you've seen my videos, you've seen some of the things that I'm doing to extend the operating session a little bit. And you'll find out that after you start operating like that, you don't need as many industries. You don't need as big a layout as you think you might. Depends on how long you really want to operate. Are you a 3-hour operations person, or are you a couple hour maybe at the most? It all depends on what's best for you. There are some guys that do the all day operations. That's great, but there's a bunch of people that after a couple of hours they've had enough. They're done for the day. So do you need a huge layout? So that's one of the things that we're going to talk about. And then on the final show, we're going to talk about operational details and super detailing. And again, John's another prime example of being able to do super fine detailing on his layout. And if you have a larger layout, it's a little bit harder to do that because you have so much layout. And how are you going to super detail it? It's going to take so much time. And each of these little projects that I've done or John's done, is very time consuming, but it really pays off on a small layout because you can see it and you appreciate it because you're up closer to the layout. You're more, as they would say, intimate with the layout because your operations are slower. You have time to check out the details and stuff. When you're running a train through scenery at 30 miles an hour, 30 scale miles an hour, there's really not time to look at all the little details. And if you like details, then maybe a smaller layout's a good choice. So those are the things that we're going to talk about on the show. But the biggest thing is I want to encourage you is to ask questions. This is a show that we're doing for you. So if you in the chat feature, type something in there, we'll be happy to answer it as best we can. I don't have all the answers. John doesn't have all the answers. But the thing that we wanted to encourage people is nobody starts off as a master model railroader. Everybody's got to learn from somewhere. I didn't start off like this. If you look at some of the first layouts I did, they were horrible. But I learned from them. And that my previous layout, I learned from that. If you go onto my website, you can see my previous Hawks Ridge layout. And I look back at it now, I was like, boy, I could have done a lot better. But I was inspired by other people that I saw, other modelers, and it just kept, up in the game. And then even with this layout, some of the first things that I've worked on could have done a little better. So I may go back and work on those. And again, you're just constantly upping your skills. So a lot of people, what happens is they wait. They're going to save up for that super railroad that they're going to build. But what we'd like to do is encourage you to start something now, maybe as they call it a chainsaw layout, something that you try, it works, you learn, and then when it's done, you can get rid of it, maybe sell it, or you haven't invested that much money in it. So it's easy to, dispose of it versus if you're waiting for the monster railroad and then you get it halfway into it and you realize this isn't really what I like, or is it really what I want to do? And now you've kind of committed. So we don't want you to feel that way. So again, I encourage you to ask questions. The only question that's a dumb question is the one that you don't ask. So ask the questions. I mean, we're happy to answer them. Again, there is no dumb question. So whether you're just starting out in the hobby or you've been in the hobby for a long time, John's relatively new. I've been in the hobby for, I'll say, a few years, but I've still got a lot to learn. I definitely don't know everything. And I think most of the modelers out there will admit there's certain parts of the hobby they like and other parts, not so much. So maybe they'll have somebody else help them or work on the wiring or something like that. So that's kind of what we're looking at doing. And again, today we're going to talk mostly about the factors to consider when building your layout and some room consideration. And then also John's going to talk about kind of how he got into the hobby and what's inspired him. So we'll have John go ahead and take care of that.
Yeah. So, Bill, last year, I think it was almost a year ago when we talked last on your show. I think it's almost been a year. But at that point, it was probably, I think this layout was only about a year or two old at that time. And as most of us, I was really big in the hobby as a small kid. Model railroading was the coolest thing in the world to me, and my grandfather did it, and I thought he was like a superhero because of his layout. And I built my 4x8, typical layout. But then it kind of went away as I grew up. It never really went away, but I just kind of, like everyone says, it kind of goes on the back burner. I went through high school, college, ended up moving down here to Florida when I on YouTube actually started seeing videos on model railroading, and I couldn't believe, how far it's come, and all these neat possibilities. So I really got inspired to get back into the hobby. Although I was kind of an armchair modeler for a few years, actually about 5 years, I didn't have space. I thought I didn't have space. I didn't really know anybody in the hobby, so I just kind of, watched videos, magazines, and so on. Started collecting a few things. I did a little N scale layout just to practice some things and run some trains. But so I ended up picking up a magazine, which I was talking to you about this earlier, Tom. I picked up this magazine in 2013, which I'm sure some of you have seen before, with Lance Manheim's Miami Downtown Spur layout. And one thing with Lance is he's huge on scenery and ultra realism, and I was blown away on how much of a layout he had, but how little track work he had. It was a layout that didn't connect anywhere. And I didn't get it because I just was getting back into the hobby. And I said, wait, this layout doesn't even go in a circle, like, because I didn't know. And then I started really understanding that, okay, well, a layout doesn't need to be, continuous loop, which is great. I mean, we all love running trains. Not saying that's anything against that, but I really got inspired by that layout and thought, well, I could probably do, a switching layout like this. So for many years, I planned it, and then just started laying down track. I basically built a very simple bench work and just, I decided I'm just going to do something, because if I keep waiting for enough space to build my large layout, I mean, in reality, I could build around the room layout, but I'm in an apartment. It's only temporary. So I started with this, and it's been a blast. I mean, you teach yourself different techniques. You teach yourself what you do and what you don't like. Um, I wasn't sure what I would like. Did I like mainline running? Did I like switching? I don't know, because I never done it. I needed to try something. So that's one big thing that we're going to try to talk about over these next few episodes is just, if you're kind of debating on getting back in the hobby, or you're in the hobby and you don't know what to model or something like that, consider doing a small shelf layout just to practice scenery, if anything. So.
I do have a few comments here on the Q&A. The comment master number 7 says, ask, why don't magazines feature small layouts, more small layouts?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think there are some, but I agree. I mean, if we're trying to give this, I think that's kind of a negative side of them only posting large layouts, where, because people only, like, for me, example, I thought that's all that was around. I didn't know that people did have small layouts.
Right, exactly. Georgia Sunbelt says, evening model railroaders. I watched the preview tonight and saw John 2618's layout. Had to see what was going on. Well, welcome, Georgia Sunbelt. They haven't seen you in quite
Hi,
a
Anthony.
while. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think unfortunately the magazines like to, the big layouts because they're, kind of over the top. And one of the things that we want to bring across on the show is, everybody says, "Oh, I got a small layout," like that's a bad thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. If that fits what you want to do with the hobby, that's fantastic. And I've gotten more, I like seeing a small layout much better than some of these massive layouts. If somebody's got a real well planned out small switching layout, I find that really interesting, because then I put myself in the situation of, okay, I've got to switch this thing. How am I going to do this? How am I going to move these cars? Where am I going to, spot these cars? How am I going to do these moves? And a lot of the other layouts, some of the large layouts are more just, run through layouts. And again, I like switching. So a small switching layout is perfect for me. If you like, large layouts with running a, commuter train or a high speed, intermodal freight or whatever, then a small switching layout's probably not the right choice for you. So, build the layout that's right for you. But I think, unfortunately, in the hobby, there's kind of a pressure is, if you don't build the big layout, you're not doing it right.
Yeah.
And what John and I are trying to say is, if you're having fun and you're enjoying the hobby, then you're doing it right. Even if you don't have a layout at all, if you just enjoy weathering, if you enjoy installing decoders and doing electrical work and doing all this other stuff, if you're enjoying what you're doing, then you're doing it right.
Yep.
And again, sometimes, those people are looked down on, and I don't get it. And that's why I wanted to try to promote this show, is to say, look, if you have a small layout, that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, because you're practicing the hobby.
Absolutely.
I just to interject here, I also think that, this is something that was comparable to the show, previous 4 series that we did. Bigger is not necessarily better. And I think this just adds to it, this new series, small layout, big opportunities. I think the best thing about this too is the effort that goes in. You guys are absolutely correct. People want to have that big layout, but half the fun is doing the research.
Yes.
Into the layout, into the railroad, whatever railroad it is that you particularly want. For me, it was, the Bush Terminal in Brooklyn. I found it to be utterly fascinating. and I dwelled and researched it, and I got into it. And the more I got into it, the more it became exciting, So I think that's part of it too, is to do the research. I've
Yeah.
talked to other model railroaders. John Arthur has a small layout, and he did a ton of research.
Yeah.
So I think that's also half the fun. I think also what happens, and this is just my personal opinion, is just that sometimes we get overwhelmed. We get the magazine, we see the YouTube videos, we see all the big layouts, and we want it. And I think what happens is that generally what happens is guys get into that, they get into the modeler fever and they want it, and what happens is they do it, but they have no rhyme, reason, or direction. Like many track plans have been laid out, and then when they realize, well, wait a minute, this isn't going to work, and that's where the frustration comes.
Starting into the hobby, I think for me, because I knew right away I wanted to be, prototypical. I wanted it to be kind of realistic because I like that. I'm fascinated by realism. I think that's amazing that you could, we could replicate the real world here on a small little layout. So I knew that's what I wanted. But the biggest thing was, you think as a newcomer, you're like, oh, well, I need to pick what I'm going to model, right? I need to either model like Norfolk Southern or Union Pacific or BNSF. And I'm like, oh, I can't build a huge layout here. So I'm not going to be able to really, get the real feel of a Class 1 railroad. So I didn't know what I wanted to do for the longest time. And, I talk about this on my videos a lot, that I saw RailServe when I was in an internship in Delaware, the small little industrial switching, and it kind of clicked. And I'm like, well, that's perfect, because while I try to figure out what I really want to model, for my next layout, because this isn't forever. So what I really want to get into, until I figure that out, I could just do a small little industry. I could build my own locomotive. So this is the first locomotive I ever did, this old RailServe unit. I just painted it up. I watched all YouTube videos. I figured it out. And like, until I knew what I wanted, like now I kind of have an idea what I want to model on my permanent layout. So this way I was able to do something, right? So I got practice kind of not scratch building, but detailing a locomotive, painting a locomotive, doing the research of a locomotive, and then getting some cars, doing some weathering, seeing what I like, what I didn't like, and then it just kind of progressed from there. But you're never going to start something and that's what you're going to model for the rest of your life. It's so why waste your time and money on something that you're not even going to keep.
True, very true. Andy Crawford says, also, I dislike this exact distinction based on size. I think it's more about the scope of the project you're building. That's especially true in the area of multi-deck layouts. Tom, on your layout, what is the achievable goal that you have on your layout that you want to do?
Yeah, well, like you said, the word that I like to use for my layout is that it's achievable. It's an achievable layout. And somebody mentioned that to me, and they said, don't take this the wrong way, Tom, but your layout is very achievable. In other words, I can see myself building it. And I said, great. I mean, that's perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. It's not an insult to me to say that it's an achievable. Somebody looks at my layout and says, yeah, I could build that, versus looking at one of these monster track plans and you go, oh, there's 300 switches and several hundred feet of main line and multi-deck, and I'll never be able to figure that out. I'll never be able to wire it and build it, and I need a whole army of friends to come over and help me. If you're going to do it by yourself, that's not realistic. So I say my layout's achievable, and that's a good thing. It's basically what I tried to do was set my railroad up so that it was something that I could reasonably achieve in a period of time. I figured, 3-4 years, I didn't want to be building this thing. I don't subscribe to the, you're going to build this layout for the rest of your life. I mean, I'd like to get to a point that it's basically done now, but I've still got a lot of projects that I want to do. And I've still got several years left in this layout. But eventually this layout may go away and there'll be something else. Every time I look at another short line, or I'm talking with John, it's like, oh, that'd be really cool to model, but
Yeah.
I've got this layout. It's like you're not married to this thing. I mean, it's something that you can get a divorce from this one. It doesn't cost you that much.
Right.
So
right.
I mean, versus other divorces, which are probably going to cost you your layout and a lot more. So this is this is something that right now I'm modeling the Georgia Northeastern. If you look at my website, it says currently modeling the Georgia Northeastern. It doesn't say I'm going to be modeling this forever. This layout's not a forever layout. I don't see it as that. So, I wanted something that I could build, finish to a reasonable degree, and then get into operations. And that's what I wanted to do. I like operating. That's my area of the hobby that I really enjoy. Again, if you've seen my layouts, you see that I'm into the operations. And part of that was that I worked for the Blue Ridge Scenic Railway, and that got me more into operations because I was talking to professional railroaders and finding out all that information you can't find on the web. You can't find it in a book. Talk to the professional railroaders, and I've got several friends that I talk to, and they've got great stories, and that just kind of motivates me to do some more operations and stuff. So that was kind of why I designed the layout like I did. The other thing that we'll talk about a little bit more was I looked at where I'm living, which I live in the mountains of Northeast Georgia. Not a whole lot of people around here. Atlanta is over 2 hours away. So why am I going to build a layout that requires 10 people to operate when I can't get 2 people to show up on a certain time of day? So why frustrate myself with doing that? I had a layout in Miami that required 6 to 8 operators, and that was in Miami with it belonging to a club and stuff. And I would struggle sometimes to get operators. And the same thing with the other friends in the area. They required 8 to 10 operators to run a layout that I used to operate on. And he would struggle to get operators. It's just life is busy. People have a lot of things going on. I know some places say, if you build it, they'll come. Maybe, but reality is it's pretty tough sometimes to get people to commit to driving, so many hours to attend an operating session with all the other things that are going on in life. So I wanted to build an achievable layout. So I kept it relatively small. I decided the room size that I have, which if you've seen and heard about my layout, it's in a 9'2" by 10'6" room. So I'm less than 100 square feet in the room that I'm in where the layout is. I cheat a little bit because I have a staging cassette that goes out into my wife's craft room, and I set that up for operating sessions, and I take it back down when I'm not operating, so it's not in the way. So that gives me a little bit more staging outside the room, and it gives me a place to come and go for the trains. But with this layout, I can do a 2.5 to 3 hour operating session because we're operating slowly. Just working part of the layout takes about an hour, which is just switching the industries in Marietta. And then I have a couple other trains. I run them in sequence. I usually have 2 operators over, which for me is perfect. I have one person as a conductor, one person as the engineer, and a 2-person crew. And that's what I like. I like that interaction between the crew. So that's why I set my layup up that way. Some people like to have single operators. Nothing wrong with that. But I like to have a 2-person crew because, again, the conductor focuses on the switching. The engineer focuses on running the throttle and actually operating the locomotive. And I have the proto throttle, so that makes it even more fun. And the engineer actually should be thinking about blowing the horn and ringing the bell and doing the things that a regular prototype engineer should be doing. If you're trying to do both jobs, it's a little hard because you're thinking, where I got to drop that car? Oh, whoops, I ran through the grade cross and forgot to blow the horn. It happens. And I see that happening on, club layouts and stuff where you're trying to juggle all this other stuff. So I like the slower paced operation. So that, again, that's why a small switching layout was good for me.
We here at the South Brooklyn Railroad have a lot of former transit workers that have operated on this, and they like operating on it because they like to break the rules when they were working with the transit authority. So I have a bunch of these little cups that I have stacked, and whenever they run through a switch, I throw a cup at them and tell them, you got to urinate in that cup.
Yeah. Got to go take the test.
Yeah, and there's no fudge on the ice cream after the operation session is over. Considering the factors on building a layout, what are the factors that, John, I mean, you were in a situation where you had an apartment, so you had to look at a situation that was a little bit different,
Yeah.
What, Tom, give us a breakdown. What are the factors into building, or a small layout?
Right. Well, the biggest one is space and our lack thereof. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities for layouts. On my old layout in Miami, I lived in my no basements in Miami, no attics in Miami, and smaller houses because of the real estate. So the only space that was really left for me to build a layout was in the garage, which is not ideal, especially in Miami. It's very hot and humid. But if you really want a layout, you'll build it wherever you can find the space. So if it's maybe not ideal, some of the other places that you can look for a layout is in a spare bedroom, or what we would also call maybe a shared space where it's part of a family room and you're able to incorporate a small layout onto one wall or something. You finish it off, make it look really nice. Museum quality is a term that people use. So that way there you could have it blend in. John has done that. Basically, he's got a small space and he's able to utilize the room for more than just the layout. If you want to talk about that, John.
Yeah. So I knew that, in my 2-bedroom apartment, which I know is a luxury for many, space is hard to come by in an apartment. But this extra bedroom, we were just going to use as an office / storage area. So I knew I wanted to build a layout in here. And at the same time, I really restricted myself, and I said, okay, I'm not going to build this massive, layout in here where you can barely just walk in, because it's tempting, right? It's a pretty decent room. I think this is about 15 by 12 or so. And again, I knew I was going to be here just temporary, and I knew that I didn't want to model this forever. This is just going to be something to learn scenery and everything like that. So I restricted myself. I was really tough on myself on the space I had. And I wanted to make sure that I had space to model. So over here, out of the camera, but I've got a small work area, which was important to me because me personally, I spend more time at the workbench than I do on the layout. So I wanted it to be comfortable. I didn't want to have to be crammed in an area, stepping over things and everything like that. So that was pretty important to me. I mean, it is very tempting to expand. Everybody else tells me like, "Oh, you got plenty more space. Just keep going, keep going." And although I'd love to, this little expansion was enough. I mean, that was almost doubling the layout size. So and I needed to make sure that, again, it's an apartment. I can't build this huge, layout with all this bench work attached to all the walls and everything if I knew it was going to be moving. And the apartment would be, oh my gosh, I don't know how much they charge me to fix the drywall. So yeah, so apartment was a good thing for me, or to kind of try new things and not get forced into building this massive layout that I knew I'd probably want to redo anyway.
Right.
Yeah, well, one of the other things that we wanted to talk about was time, and time can actually be broken down into two things. How much time do you have to build, and how much time do you want an operating session to be? Each of those, it influences how big of a layout you want to build. How much time? Everybody underestimates how much time it actually takes to build a model or build a layout, and it's like,
Oh
oh
yeah.
well, I'll have this thing finished in just a few days. Yeah, well, a few weeks, and you're still working on it. And that's one of the things that I, looking back, I wish I had about a year from the time we moved into the house before I started. It was actually about a year and a half before we started finishing the basement. The basement was unfinished, so in that time I started drawing track plans and doing things like that. I wish I had actually spent some of that time custom painting locomotives and doing decoder installations and all these other things that are very time consuming. I spent the time kind of doing research and track planning, which wasn't wasted time because it allowed me to refine the track plan. I kept, getting a little better, a little better. I finally got to the point where you see it now. But, not everybody has the time to be able to put into, building a layout. So, think about that when you say, okay, yeah, I want to build this, 50 by whatever layout. Do you have the time? Do you really want to put that much time into it, or do you have other interests? I mean, people have jobs, people have other things. I mean, when I was building my old layout, I was, working over 40 hours a week and had kids and, soccer and all those other things that goes on. And, the time for the layout just kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So again, even though now I'm retired and have supposedly all sorts of free time, it's it's not really, you don't really have all that much free time. So, again, how much time do you really want to spend in the hobby? And that's something else to think about is, getting burned out. I mean, you sit here and you just work on this thing, work on it. And I think that's something that we really I want to talk about that maybe in another show. But, some people, it's like, oh man, I don't want to go back to the, well, if you've committed yourself to building a huge layout, then you're like, well, I really need to work on this thing, because if not, I'm never going to finish it. So a friend of mine says his goal is to finish the layout before he croaks, and he's been working on it for over 20 years. Hopefully he'll finish it, but it's going to be a race to the end. And he makes that joke all the time, but he is serious too, because it's, there's going to be a point where he's not going to be able to work on the layout as he's getting older. It's getting more difficult. And what was an easy duck under when you were 20 years younger is not so much an easy duck under, and all those other things that you think about when you're building, because you want to get a little bit more in here and squeeze this that way. And then the other one about time is, how much time do you want to spend in an ops session? And a couple of things that I did a couple of time studies. How long does it take to switch out a car at an industry? Or how much time does it take to drop off a car at an industry? And if you start figuring that out, it's basically just to drop off a car takes about 2.5 minutes. Stop on the main, cut it off, pull up, throw the switch, drop it off, come back, or I'm sorry, set it out. Drop is a railroad term they don't use anymore. So now you come back out, hook back up, and mosey on down the line. That takes about 2 to 3 minutes, depending on how fast you're operating. Again, you should be operating relatively slowly if you're switching. Now, if you've got to pull a car and put it out on the main, now set the car back out, come back, you're looking at about 5 minutes. And if you have to do some shuffling because it's a spot specific industry, you're looking at maybe 5 to 10 minutes. Well, there's 10 minutes of an operating session. If you only like to operate for half hour, 45 minutes, how many industries do you need? Maybe only 4 or 5. And that'll get you to 45 minutes to an hour of operating time. I didn't quite understand that when I was building the layout. And the more I've operated, the more I've seen it takes a lot longer to operate. People are shocked that you can come into my layout and spend 2.5 to 3 hours operating, and you're having a good time and the time is flying, but you're switching cars, and it's not made up work. It's just a simple, pull this car from here, put a car there, move on down the line, do this at the next industry, do a runaround move if you have to, little simple things like that. And it all takes time. So those are some of the things that you need to think about. The other one is motivation. How motivated are you to build this layout or complete it? And that comes and goes. Sometimes you're super motivated. One of the things I did is I'll work on it for every day for maybe a couple of weeks, and then okay, I'm done, and I'll walk away for a month. And that's one of the nice things with model railroading is you can walk away for a while and then come back. It's not going anywhere. You may have to clean the track, but if you want to step away for a while or reevaluate what you're doing, it's not a problem. So
yeah,
Randall Ellis has made a comment and talking in regards to what you're saying, Tom. He says, and let's not forget about dealing with things like, if you want to put it into your operating session, hot axles and dragging equipment.
Yes.
A lot of guys do that.
Yes.
Comment Master number 7 says, how about this idea for a small layout? A 50s era desert layout on the Santa Fe Railroad, 2-track circles with DC train on each circle. One train is a freight train, the other is a passenger train. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. One thing we always talked about too, Tom and I, is, Tom and I have HO scale switching layouts, right? That doesn't mean that a shelf layout has to be an HO scale switching layout. There can be plenty of opportunity, especially with N scale. I mean, N scale now is so amazing, the detail. You could have literally probably, up a wall, turn around and come back and turn around. You could have a whole continuous loop on a shelf layout. So, HO switching, N scale, you could do your continuous running. You could still do a switching layout in N scale, which it could be small enough that you could even put it on a piece of foam board and even put it in the closet or something when you're done.
Right.
Again,
Well,
it's just something to do.
Yeah, we had a guy from Las Vegas on years ago who actually built a small N scale layout in a closet.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
MHO
John and I were
Junction.
also talking about O scale. I mean, don't forget O scale.
Yeah,
You can get a
yeah.
real nice, a lot of guys as they're getting older, like myself included, my vision's not the same as what it used to be when I was younger. And maybe the next layout I'll do might be O scale. I mean, there's a lot of great equipment out there for O scale. ON30 is another
Yep.
option. So
Big
Well,
time.
yeah.
you don't have to do this monster layout. You could do a small logging camp like what they're doing, the project layout that David Pop is doing on Model Railroad Video Plus. He's got a logging railroad and stuff. That's a neat little layout. I mean, again, lots of operation, relatively small space. You could do it in ON30 or whatever, or in HON3. It gives you a lot more options. Again, smaller equipment, smaller cars. And that's something else that we're going to talk about on another show is, selecting industries and cars and stuff for your layout. What were you going to say, John? You're going to mention one more thing.
Okay, John, go ahead.
No, I was just going to talk about the O, and you got it.
Yeah. You guys should check out there across Anchor Railroad. They do O scale
Yes.
operation. Guys are fantastic. Mike and I got the other guy's name.
Brian. I think it's Brian.
Brian, right? Brian and Mike. MHO Junction says there's nothing wrong in operating by yourself. If no one shows up, it will just take 6 days instead of 1. He's right about that. But
Yeah.
what this. Let's see.
Yeah, that brings up another point. Well, again, we'll talk about it a little bit more in the operations section, but this is a layout that I can operate by myself, and it doesn't mess things up. John's the same way. If I come down after dinner, I want to just switch some cars around. Don't even look at the switch list. I'll go pick this car up from here, set it out and stuff, and just use the layout and enjoy it and stuff. And it doesn't mess things up because it's such a big layout. Oh, there's some people that have layouts that they can't operate in between operating sessions because it's going to mess things up. If if you move that car, then it's not going to be where it needs to be for the operating session. Here, this layout is real easy to restage. It's real easy to set up. It's, again, if I want to just come down and move some cars and again, the operating sessions can be whatever length I want. I've had people that come down and they've only got a limited amount of time, so we work until they say, okay, well, I got to go. And it may be right in the middle of a job. That's fine. That's not a problem on a small layout. You try doing that on some of the other larger layouts. You probably won't be invited back if all of a sudden you have to go for whatever reason. That's, again, you're going to mess up everything, so
Right.
those are some things.
Tom, you talked about space time. Now let's talk about the big money.
Money. Well, everybody's got plenty of money, right? So hobby budget's unlimited. So it's fine to go out and buy all these new release locomotives. And I mean, John's got a nice collection there, but with a small layout, you don't need that many cars. You don't need that much equipment. Actually, one of the benefits to modeling a prototype, I'm a proto freelance. It's prototype based, but I'm leaning a little bit toward the freelance side. Everything's not exactly where it is on the prototype. Some guys are strict 100% prototype. If it's got 4 windows in it, the building has 4 windows on their layout. Mine is not like that. It's a rough approximation of what their rough, it looks kind of like it. Most of the people look at it and they go, oh yeah, that's the locomotive facility in Tate. Well, the actual one's a little bit taller and a little bit bigger, and it's got a door over here on this side. And it's not 100, but the sand tower is pretty close. I don't know if you can see the sand tower. That was based on the structure. So combining some of the prototype elements with some other areas that maybe wander a little bit from that, allows me to build, and it looks more prototypical. But money is what we're talking about, and again, how much money do you have to spend on this? People don't realize. Well, am I going to hand lay track? Am I going to buy switch? Well, how much is a turnout? $10, $20, somewhere in between there. Probably $15 to $20 at least now. $20.
28, depending on the maker of it.
Yes. So even if I'm saying, even if you buy some at, it's a swap meet, secondhand and stuff, you're still looking at somewhere between 10 and $30 a turnout. And then you design a layout that requires 120 turnouts. Start doing the math and you realize I just spent a bunch of money on turnouts and I haven't even bought the first locomotive or car or whatever. So those something else that you need to think about as you're going into the hobby is, the money's not unlimited. So the bigger the layout, the more it's going to eat the money, eat the budget. And there's a point where you're going to start creating some friction within the household, if you understand what I'm saying, where you're spending some money that maybe could be used for other things. So that's something that you really need to look at. And the next one that we're going to talk about is skill level. What's your skill level? I mean, be honest. I'm learning every time. Every time I build, I've done a couple of projects 2 and 3 times because I messed up the first one. So, as you build your layout, your skills are gonna go up. And that's one of the things that we're also encouraging is, a lot of people will wait and they'll say, well, I'll build the layout later. I'll save up for the big one. I won't do anything. But they've never laid track. They've never installed a decoder. They've never done any structures or building or weathering and all that stuff. So now all this stuff, now I'm going to build a layout. Now I've got to learn all these skills. I got to be a carpenter. I got to be an electrician. I got to be a track engineer. I got to be a DCC decoder installation expert. I need to be, or, well, I'll pay people to do that. Well, how much does that cost to have somebody else, install a decoder for you? And there's back to the money again. You're going to pay one way or the other with time or with money. So what are your thoughts on that, John?
No, it's when I first started mine, I was a different situation financially, where I started with this shelf, which isn't typical bench work or anything. It's very cheap wood I had laying around at my father-in-law's house. We just made a shelf, so that really didn't cost me much. I used some inexpensive shelving brackets from Home Depot. Track, I didn't need much track. I only needed a few turnouts. And then the structures, all of my structures are scratch built. So that was one thing I really was interested in. So again, I practiced on small little structures, just test pieces, watching lots of YouTube videos or other videos. So I kind of saved money that way. Scratch building is a great way to save money. You still got to pay for paint materials, and with scratch building, I think you pay with time instead of money, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you got 2 ways: you pay with your money or pay with your time. So I decided to scratch build things. One locomotive was all I needed for this layout, and a few cars. And that's another thing. Rolling stock, we'll get it. Like you said, we'll get into that later. But I didn't need a $50 piece of rolling stock. I bought cheap and expensive rolling stock and weathered them, and they look great when they're up next to other other cars. You can't even tell because they're weathered and so on. But yeah, money is a big thing. I mean, we all like to have these nice things, but at the end of the day, how much are you willing to pay?
Well, my personal goal is to look like a Swedish swimsuit model, but that's so in the meantime, model railroading. So,
right.
I think these are all valid points. I think these are things that everybody's got to consider in doing this. And what we're getting on the comments and we're not really getting a lot of Q&A, but MHO Junction said this hobby is all about time. If you don't have time, it's the wrong hobby for you.
Yep. Unless you want to collect things, which again, there's nothing wrong with collecting. But
right, exactly. You got some armchair modelers that just are always planning their layout in their head. I have a friend of mine that does for years now. That's all he does. I'm going to build it. And every time I go to help him, it's like, oh, not today. I got to be someplace.
Yeah, I got a friend like that too. He's been building this dream layout in his head for the last 15 years. He still hadn't cut the first piece of wood the last time I talked to him. So, but he's got all the rolling stock. He's got everything he needs. He's got the track. He just hasn't built it. And
yeah, exactly.
Again, it seems to me that, again, this is the neat thing about this hobby is it's an operating hobby. It's not a static hobby. The idea is you can actually see these things move through what you create.
Right.
If you want to just do static modeling, then maybe it's, doing, model kits and building cars and doing that kind of stuff, model cars and automobiles,
Dioramas. Yeah, yeah.
and doing dioramas and stuff. Yeah, those are, again, that's great. But the nice part of this hobby is you can actually see things move and the operation side. And again, talking with time, it also goes into maintenance. How much time do you have to maintain your layout? Again, you talk to different people or you read the different forums. Oh, I never cleaned my track. Really? Okay. Well, how well does your layout run then? For me, that's at the top of the list, is smooth running, no hiccups, no glitches, no nothing. And it's a lot easier to achieve on a smaller layout than it is on a massive layout. I mean, I can sit here and tweak this thing. Every turnout has been tweaked. I've got feeders everywhere. I've got, electrical districts. I've over-engineered the electrical side, but I don't like when a locomotive stalls on a turnout or a locomotive derails. So maintenance comes back to that, and how much time do you want to spend doing maintenance on your layout? So again, smaller, you can focus on those things. Larger, it kind of gets lost. I mean, realistically, I understand that. I mean, I've operated on some large layouts and there's derailments, there's problems. I can't remember the last time I had a derailment on my layout that wasn't human error from somebody running over a switch that was thrown against them, or maybe like I did on that one, running over a wheel chalk or something. I mean,
my good friend Frank DeLauro. He's listening, right, Frank? You never derailed the train, right? When you
no, never.
Alex, I'm gonna mess this name up again, Tom.
Bogatsky?
Yeah, Bogatsky. There you go.
My good buddy Alex. Yes.
Alex, John, what would you do differently on your rail serve layout if you could go back?
What would I do differently?
Yeah.
Well, it's tough. I spent a lot of time. I mean, I think I have maybe 20 different versions of the track plan. I probably would change the way I did some of the track embedded in concrete. I wasn't so happy with the first way I did it, again, because I was just learning. I did it all. I embedded the track and I used something that wasn't the best material. On the new expansion, I used a different way of doing it, different plaster, and tinted it and everything, and much happier with that result. So yeah, I would probably change how much track I have embedded in concrete. Not that it's a bad thing, but it's hard to clean. It's hard to, you can't take a bright boy and just go ahead and clean the track, or even with alcohol or the track cleaning solution, it gets, it seeps into the concrete. So yeah, I would probably change that a little bit.
Crazy Joe 67 says clean track is rule number one. Michael Lambertino has a question. Hey, Mike, this question is for both of you. What brand of track do you use and what code?
I'll go ahead and start off. Mine's easy. Microengineering code 70 track and number 6 microengineering turnouts. That's it. And if you look at certain parts, some of the track looks like it's, a smaller, maybe 55 or whatever. It's just the way that I ballasted. I brought the ballast up over the ties a little bit. I used in-scale ballast so it didn't interfere with the flange, and then just kind of embedded the track, lowered it down. The main line is up on cork, and then I've got the little ramp down where it drops down onto the sidings, and the sidings are either on the base layout base or maybe on sheet cork, which is real thin. It's about 1/8 of an inch thick or whatever. So it gives you that nice little transition down. So you'll notice the sidings are lower than we'll call it the main line, but it's all code 70 track.
Yeah, might as well. I'm all code 70 on the main portion of the layout. Microengineering turnouts. Again, I didn't want to do switch machines. I just wanted it to be, again, I was kind of on a really tight budget in the beginning. So being able just to go ahead and switch the turnout with my hand and have it sprung made it very, very simple. I did power the frogs, all except one, which is, I will have powered one day. I did with the Tam Valley frog juicers, which they're pretty cheap if you buy, like they have a 4-way one. but it's worth it, in my opinion. If you have frogs that give you problems. The new part, I did some code 80 track, but that was just because I needed a curved turnout, and I wasn't able to, hand lay the track on that part, which is something I would like to try one day, but not for this.
Just so that we clarified things, my retiree Frank DeLauro says collided trains, but I've
Oh,
never.
stayed on the tracks.
Oh, okay. That's a big difference.
I am familiar with that collision. I am familiar with that collision that Frank had. So yeah, it made its way around the system pretty good.
That's cool.
No, it wasn't. You on Naked Floss says he has a question for you, Tom. He wants to know, how do you do switches? Frog juices, powered frogs, or keep alives in the locomotives?
Right. I'm like John. I wanted simpler is betterer is the way that I phrase it. I try to keep things simple. Again, some of that's from my fire department background. Didn't like having things complicated to put the fire out, so we went with simple on the Miami Fire Department. I wanted to do the same thing here, so I use the microengineering switches, and they're just the sprung points, just like they come out of the box. It did take a little bit of work to get them to work right. And the biggest thing is when you're ballasting and gluing the ballast down, don't glue the turnout points shut, because it makes it really tough. And yeah, nobody's ever done that before. So yeah, again, lessons learned. But I also use the frog juicers. Highly recommend the Tam Valley frog juicers. You can go basically one of two ways. You can put a keep alive in your locomotive, or you can do frog juicers. I went for the frog juicer route, and like what John said, I use the hex frog juicer, which does six turnouts with one device. And real simple, you put two wires, put your bus wires in, left and right rail, whatever, and then one wire to each frog. And I wired them up into the districts, into the power districts where they were, and it worked out. Again, like John, I have one turnout that does not have a frog juicer on it, and that happens to be on my staging cassette, but it really hasn't been a problem. So again, it's just a very small frog. But again, I would highly recommend frog juicers and dropping lots of feeders. I mean, some guys say every piece of rail. I wasn't quite that crazy with it, but pretty much every other piece of rail, within every 4 to 5 feet, there's a feeder there. And again, basic electric. I use DCC, so it's wiring's pretty easy. That's something else that we can talk about on another show is DC versus DCC. A small layout is actually a good one for using DC, because you're working one block, so you don't have to worry about multiple blocks and throwing switches and doing that kind of stuff. If you still like to run DC locomotives, a small layout is ideal for it. So
Hold on. I have so many of them here.
Yeah.
Who is it?
While we're looking here, let me go over one more thing to consider is do you like a continuous run or point to point? Those are some other things to consider when you're operating. And the biggest way to think about that is, how do you like to watch the prototype? Do you like to sit railside and watch the trains go by, or do you like to go find an industrial area and watch the work of a switch crew? If you like the work of a switch crew, then you're probably going to be happier with a point to point versus a continuous run. If you like to see trains go by and move through scenery and stuff, then you're going to need to find a way to do a continuous run. And again, just because you have a room that's larger, let's say you do have the opportunity to build in a larger room, you don't have to necessarily build a larger layout. You can keep the layout simple, keep it just basic narrow shelf. The trains run through the scene. That gives you the open feeling that you're looking for. Tony Custer's talked about that numerous times in his articles and stuff. Maybe only 6 to 8 inches wide, because that gives you just enough to model the right of way along the railroad, and you don't have a ton of money that you're gonna have to spend on scenery materials, which adds up really quick. Again, another friend of mine's dealing with that now. He's realizing his bench work is so wide, he's spending lots of money on trying to do static grass and scenery and stuff like that, when it really doesn't impact the operations. Yeah, it looks a little nicer because there's more room, but you got one piece of track and now you got 18 inches to scenic versus one piece of track at 8 inches to scenic. So that's something else to consider. Again, do you like the continuous run, or do you like point to point? And again, a smaller layout typically, works at better as a point to point. It's awful hard to get that layout to turn, and you start again. I've talked to several people, and they have these great plans, and then the reality kicks in when they have to deal with a tape measure. A 24-inch radius curve takes up a lot of room, and you're thinking, well, I can turn it and then put a switch and do this, and then come back. It doesn't fit. It's not going to fit.
Doesn't work,
So,
right.
so use a track planning program, or draw them up on a grid paper or something like that, so that you're sticking to your minimums and stuff. And again, we'll talk about that in the other shows. What was the question there, Bill?
Well, I have something from Rick Diaz. He says, hello from Miami. He says, sell your Hawks Ridge layout short. It was an awesome layout to run, operations on it, and detail was fantastic.
Oh, well, thanks, Rick. Rick was one of my operators in Miami. He's probably still the president of the Echoes Model Railroad Club. That's ECHOES, East Coast HO Exhibitors Layout, and that was a modular club that I belonged to. And when I left Miami, I donated the modules that I had, which was part of my Hawks Ridge layout. I donated them to the club, and they're still there. I watch, one of the guys does videos on them, and I'll see my old module there. I was like, oh man, that is horrible. But at the time, I thought it was pretty good. But I look at it back now, and that's what I'm saying. Your skills improve. So I look back, and Rick's a great guy. Well, glad to see you here, Rick. Miss you guys down there in Miami, but he's doing well. The club is actually doing really well. They're getting into operations and doing a lot more stuff. We used to just do a setup once a year at this what they called Harvest Festival, which was a big festival in Miami, and we'd set up all the modules, and we had a pretty good size layout. I mean, depending on who showed up, we I don't know, gosh, 200-300 feet of mainline track at least, maybe even more. And it was fun, but it was just a run them in a circle for multiple hours. And it was good. I mean, I had fun and I learned a lot, and that's the thing, meeting people in the hobby, and that's probably we'll probably tie up with that, and we can cover some of the other stuff. But the biggest thing from this hobby is the people that you meet. I've met some great people. John, Bill is a prime example. Through the YouTube channels and stuff, and friends that I've got are now lifelong friends, like Rick Diaz and some of the other guys that I've met in Miami. And it was, again, encouragement from them, maybe a little prodding, maybe a little shaming, I mean, it's all good stuff. I mean, I did operating sessions. One of the other guys down there in Miami, we used to work adjacent yards, and, he'd give me a hard time. I'd give him a hard time. I'd catch him messing up. He'd catch me. And again, great friends, great time. And that's the biggest thing with the hobby is, the enjoyment. That's probably the biggest thing with my layout is I enjoy having people come over and operate on it and see them operating and bringing the layout to life. I mean, that to me is the ultimate. That's the ultimate goal of this. I mean, I could have just been here running the layout all by myself, never posted anything on YouTube, never done anything, and, sat in the closet. And basically that's what this is. It's a glorified closet and run trains. But I really like meeting the people and talking to people and having people contact me, ask questions. And then, I learn from them, they learn from me. And that's to me is the best part.
Yes, it is. I have to agree. I really have to agree. John, let me ask you a question. What's the best thing about operating on your layout that you find enjoyable?
For me, what I like enjoying, well, I wanted it to be something that I could easily come in and just, whether it was work on some part of the layout or just move a couple cars. I don't know. I love that. And I don't know about you guys, but maybe this is the thing with model railroaders, but I like just looking at the layout. Like my wife laughs at me because I'll be like sitting in the doorway and I'll just be like leaned against the door and I'm looking in there and I'm like thinking, you're thinking of things. And I'm just looking, she's like, what are you doing? Like you're just standing there. And I'm like, I'm thinking. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I love to like you build this world and then you kind of get to go in it. Like you're in this little world that you create. And you're in control of it. I don't know. That's what I love about it. I mean, if I never would have just started building, I wouldn't be here with you guys. And I've met so many awesome friends through YouTube. So, I mean, yeah, I love that.
My wife has a picture of me from the doorway, looking at the layout. And when she shows it to me, she says, "What are you thinking about when you're
Yeah.
with the intensity?" I said to her, "Well, I was thinking of whether or not we should sell wheat to China or to Russia." It's really so. I just focused on it. What's the worst thing you don't like about it?
Um,
I shouldn't say worst. What is the one that you dislike? Worst is like an extreme. What's the one thing you dislike? And those two questions will go for you, Tom, after John answers.
Okay.
about the layout.
Well, yeah. What is the one thing that you just?
Well, there is with the way I did this extra section here. Everybody laughs because like when I do my live stream, I always have one turnout that always dies on me because it's in a bad spot. That extra extension here was just going to be temporary. Again, it naturally formed into being scenic and everything like that. But I didn't take my time and lay it in properly, so the turnout is kind of on the joint, and it's not 100% level. So when a locomotive comes over it, it kind of crests the hill right on the frog, and one of the wheels often just comes up and it kills the locomotive. So that's the one. I need to put in a frog juicer there on that one. That's the only turnout that doesn't have a frog juicer. So that's the one thing that I just feel like ripping it out one day and probably just replace it. But whatever.
Tom, what's the best thing you love about your layout?
Well, like I said, but besides the operating session and having people over, just doing the operations, and like John says, just escaping mentally whatever into this little world, and just trying to imagine how the prototype would do it, how the conductors and the engineers would switch it, and that kind of stuff. And then my question, your question is, what do I not like about my layout? It's right here, aisle space. Aisle space. I got 28 inches between the two sides and the peninsula here. If I had a bigger room, it would not be a bigger layout. It would be more room in the aisles. It's not bad. I mean, nobody's really complained when they come over, but it's a little bit hard to, if you need to, sneak past each other. I mean, you turn sideways, you can get by. You can get two people by. But again, it's a little tight. So I would do bigger aisles. But other than that, I'm pretty happy with the way the layout worked out. The track plan is good. The operations are good. Again, short of having a bigger space, that's about the only thing.
Yeah, okay. Possum Bayou says, "I always look at my layout before I go to bed."
Yeah, that's usually the time I'm standing in the doorway.
Right. Grain Express says the worst thing is turning off the lights. So very true. So very true. I tell you, there is so much more to get into. I don't have a problem going further if you guys.
That's fine with me. If everybody wants to hang out here a little bit more, the last thing that we had on we'll call it the schedule, which doesn't really matter. They're just
Bullet
things that
points.
we wanted to talk about. But a couple of things to consider when you're looking for a layout room or whatever is, we talked already about spare bedrooms or multi-use rooms. Alex has got a nice little layout. Alex Bogowski, he's got a nice little layout in his living room. I mean, imagine that. That's true love there with his wife, to allow him to have his layout in the living room. But he's finished it really nice. It looks like a museum piece. It's a very nice little shelf layout. It's got some books underneath. It's got a balance over it. I mean, very nice. It's a small switching layout, and it allows him to switch some cars, do a little operating session and stuff. So there's options if you just look outside the box. You don't have to have the basement. You don't have to have a huge separate room shed. I mean, some people have train sheds. That's great. That's another option, is a separate structure. Get a shed building, but then you have to heat it and air condition it. And that's probably one of the other things to talk about is, ideally your train room should be climate controlled. It's awful tough to go to work on a layout. And again, I ran into that in Miami in the garage in the middle of July, to go to an unair conditioned garage and work on a layout. It's miserable. It's too hot. And then those that live in cold climates, if you're working in a garage and it's not heated, now you're freezing to death and you can't get your fingers to work. And then the track's going to expand and contract, and you're going to deal with all these other issues. So ideally, your layout room should be climate controlled. The other thing to consider is lighting. John has got some. If you want to talk about your lighting balance there, John, for a few minutes.
Sure. I spent a lot of time thinking about the lighting. You read all these people talk about different, LED, fluorescence, anything like that. So I kind of thought too. I think I spent too much time thinking about it, and I ended up just buying some inexpensive shop lights from Home Depot, and I mounted them in the edge, kind of in the corner of the valance. Now the valance, that shelf is exactly the same as this shelf. They're identical. The only difference, obviously, is the layouts on this one, and on this one, it's just for storage, and then the lighting on top. And then with the expansion I did, I thought that the lighting looked really good, and I think that's important too. If you're going for that kind of realistic look, lighting does play a huge deal in how it's gonna look, especially on the models and on the backdrop. So I kind of wanted an even light. So when I put the extension on, I didn't have any light over it, and I didn't want to build again a big valance to go across the window, and it's just getting too complicated. So I just made that cheap. Those are 2 pieces of aluminum I got from Home Depot. That cost me maybe $15. I bent them to the curve of the backdrop, bent them over. I mounted that shop light on both ends with 2 little hooks, and then that's actually the cardboard box that the light came in. I just cut it and made a little valance out of it. So that's what I did. I didn't go too crazy on it. Again, I made it removable.
Overcome and adapt.
Yeah, I just spray painted it black, and just so the light's not in your eyes. I think the valance, I didn't have it on there first, and I kind of noticed if you're staying there, kind of like it's blinding.
Couldn't understand why you were getting these terrible headaches. Like, why?
Yeah, or sunburn.
Right. Alex says, hey, thanks for the East Penn shout out. And we love it in the living room. I'm not going to tell you what Frank DeLauro said. And Frank, you should be ashamed of yourself for saying what he said. Let's see. Michael he had a question and he's asking it twice, so I want to get to it. Oh, he wants to know, Michael Lambertini wants to know, what DC system do you both use on your layouts?
So mine's simple. I use the NCE power cab. It's I kept it simple. I bought one back in the day. I shouldn't say back in the day. Maybe 7 years ago at my local hobby shop. It was a used one, and I didn't know anything about DCC or anything. So I just kind of got lucky and got it, and I enjoy it. It's simple enough for me to walk around the layout. Tom's going to go over into what he has, but I really want to get the Proto Throttle one of these days. I'll probably have that again because I just like the feel of it. I enjoy it. Again, it's not for everybody, but I really love the operation of the Proto Throttle. So one day I'll own one.
Well, just so you guys know, Christmas is coming up out there in the community. So this would be the time to start dropping hints, leaving the website for the site for Proto Throttle and stuff like that. Right. Yeah. So Tom, what's the DC system that you use?
Oh, he's muted or something.
Let's see if that better.
There you go.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I use Digitrax DCC. The reason behind that is because the club in Miami was using Digitrax, and most of the people that I knew there had Digitrax. So that was the reason. A lot of the layouts that I go and operate on here in the Atlanta area also use Digitrax. So it's kind of worked out. Again, there's it's a Ford Chevy debate, which one's better. I mean, Digitrax has some pluses, NCE has some pluses, some of the other systems also have pluses. the biggest thing for me now is the proto throttle, and thankfully the guys at Iowa Scaled Engineering were able to get it to link up with the Digitrax LNWI. It was a little convoluted, hookup, but it works great. And for me, that's been the best thing is especially on a small switch and layout. It gives you the feel of actually running a locomotive where you've got the braking and you notch up, and then the sound when you pair the sound with the proto throttle. I don't think you can get much more realistic than that. So
Okay.
that's
All right. Comments on the proto throttle. They love it, but the money scares.
yes. Well, like
It's
you
not
said,
for
Christmas
everybody.
is coming. Yeah, and it's
That
not for
is.
everybody. And hopefully Scott is going to be on one of our next broadcasts here, Scott Thornton, and he's not only going to talk about the proto throttle. He actually has a layout and has a smaller layout, so we're going to talk about that. But the proto throttle is, I mean, it is a bit of a splurge for some people, but again, I think it's something that you use every time, and it just the experience for me is worth the money.
Yeah, yeah. I think, well, if we're willing to drop $300 to $400 on a DCC sound locomotive, and other stuff.
Yeah. Well, the thing is with the proto throttle, I use it all the time, every time I operate the layout. Versus a locomotive may only get used, once. I've got a couple
Exactly.
locomotives I haven't run, so
So the cost factor is, it pays for itself.
Yeah.
The use of it. So I think ultimately what happens is that if you're happy with it and you're fine and at peace with spending, dropping that kind of coin, that's on, that's you. That's
yeah, it's a decision that people make. I'm not going to tell you it's the only decision. You could, decide for yourself. It again depends on how much you like operations. If you're into switching, then it's really if you're just going to run the train, continuously for an hour, you're not going to get the value out of the proto throttle.
exactly. And it's not going to be something you're going to be enjoying anyway, and then you'll be kicking yourself and selling it on eBay for $55.
No, I don't think so. There's been a few guys that have sold their proto throttle and they didn't take much of a hit. I mean, they sold them for pretty close to what they paid for them. They're still in demand.
I know. The resale value
Yeah,
is
but
there. Definitely not a problem.
yeah.
But it's all good. It's all
Okay.
good. Well,
Any other questions there, Bill?
no, not really. We kind of like
Okay.
the thing and stuff like that. This is I think we can wind this up now.
Right.
I think that this has been really exciting, and I'm looking forward to the next three. The next one is September 19th.
Right. Next Saturday, the 19th at 9 p.m.
The 19th at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's where we'll be getting into designing a small layout and, and stuff like that. Tom, do you have any, and John, any closing remarks that you'd like to make for our community?
No, I just kind of what Tom was saying in the beginning, that people may have came in a little late, that we're not here to push this style of modeling on anybody. We're just showing what we enjoy, the opportunities. Maybe you're just starting out, maybe you're looking to take a turn in the hobby or something like that. Scale doesn't matter. Again, N scale, HO scale, there's a lot of opportunity in a small amount of space. So that's basically what we're just going to be talking about.
Tom.
Yeah, same, exactly the same. Just again, try to take away the stigma that a small layout is less fulfilling or less fun, or whatever term you want to use. But yeah, again, you can have as much fun with a small layout as you can with a large layout, and maybe even more fun because it's what's right for you.
Right.
Yep.
I think that this new endeavor that we've embarked on is going to be pretty good and pretty cool to do. And I think that I'm glad that we were able to partner together on Model Railroading Live, the #1 model railroading company in the world. Before we close out, I just want to say we were talking about the layout and everything. I want to apologize to Sir Rod Stewart. We were supposed to have him on as a surprise guest, but obviously we ran out of time. And we won't be able to get Rod Stewart tonight on the show. Rod, I'm so sorry that happened. I know you were excited to talk about your Beverly Hills Model Railroading Club and doing on your layout and stuff, but perhaps maybe we can get you next time on September 19th is when we'll be back. I'll see if we can work you in. again, I do apologize. We here at Model Railroading Live want to thank you guys for appearing and for watching out there, because if you're not watching, we're talking to dead air. So take care, you be well, you be safe, you be blessed, and we'll see you guys on the radio.